An 83-year-old man sat silently on the sidewalk under the scorching sun, his hands resting on his knees like any nameless stranger. Why did the whole town hold its breath when they saw him? This was no ordinary arrest. This was the moment when disrespect collided with quiet honor, as a rusted pickup truck laid bare a hero's secret. James Callahan, with eyes as sharp as steel, was not someone easily forgotten. As the flashing lights danced behind him, he knew. Today, the world would finally see who he truly was. What compelled a 4-star general to abandon headquarters and stand by his side? What secret hidden in that battered old truck brought an entire community to its knees, begging for forgiveness? To never miss a story like James's, hit subscribe and ring the bell on Veteran Best Stories, the place where unsung heroes are honored. This tale will make you weep, reflect, and reconsider how you treat strangers. Join us to witness the journey that moved millions of hearts. James Callahan was never one to hurry. At 83, he walked with unhurried steps, not because his legs were weary or his strength spent, but because he had lived through days when time flew like a bullet, and every moment could mark the end. In those years, he learned that serenity is a precious gift, granted only to those who have stared down the line between life and death. That morning, as always, James woke before dawn. His gaze swept over the simple wooden house, each crack in the wall whispering its own story. He donned his old coat, the one that had accompanied him across scorching deserts, through humid jungles, and amid biting blizzards. The coat was clean, yet marked by time, much like the man himself, steadfast, silent, and full of secrets that needed no telling. James stepped into the yard, where the battered Chevy waited. Its engine coughed in protest at the cold morning, but he only smiled, running a hand over the peeling paint. This vehicle was more than transport. It was part of him. Decades ago, when the town was little more than dusty roads, James had built it himself. He selected every bolt and gear, transforming a heap of scrap into a tireless machine. No radio, no heater, just the wind through the open window and the scent of old motor oil. The license plate was rusted, but James didn't mind. To him, function mattered more than flair. That Chevy, like its owner, didn't run to boast. It ran to get the job done. Today, James drove to the hardware store on the town's edge. A widow lived at the end of the road, and she'd asked him to repair her porch before the coming storm. She had little money, and James, as always, charged nothing. He didn't work for pay. He worked to keep his world from falling apart, one small porch at a time. Inside the store, the scent of fresh lumber and cement stirred memories of distant days when he'd pitched tents on battlefields beneath a hail of bullets. A young clerk, eager to help, offered to load the wood onto James's truck. James merely shook his head, a faint smile on his weathered face. "I've got it," he said in a low, assured voice. The clerk nodded, curiosity in his eyes as he watched this unassuming old man handle planks like a seasoned artisan. James selected each board with care, inspecting them as a craftsman would. He didn't refuse help out of pride, but because this was how he lived. Everything he owned, from the Chevy to his wooden home, was fashioned by his own hands. His knotted fingers, once deft at disassembling rifles in the dark and tightening parachute lines before leaping into enemy territory, now gently lifted boards into the truck bed. He worked with complete focus, as if each plank were a piece of a grander puzzle that only he could see. When the morning sun caught the shoulder of his coat, a small detail glinted from beneath the worn fabric, a faded badge of the parachute division. It lay there, silent like the man himself. No fanfare, no demand for attention. Yet, to the observant eye, It told a long story of youth spent leaping into smoke-filled fields, where comrades fell and he, by some miracle, pressed on. Those tales remained locked away. He never spoke of the medals hidden under his bed, or the nights spent awake to the echo of bombs in his mind. To James, the past was part of him, not a trophy to display. He simply wanted to live, to work, and to mend what was broken, whether a porch or a life. As he steered the Chevy away from the store, the engine's steady rasp blended with the crisp morning air. The dirt road stretched toward the widow's house, and James felt the familiar calm settle over him. He needed no radio to fill the silence, no conversation to feel whole. For him, work was enough. Repairing a porch, helping a neighbor, and keeping the town running. That was James Callahan's way of life. Quiet, unassuming, relentless. The Chevy rolled forward at a measured pace, echoing James's own rhythm. Sunlight streamed through the windshield, illuminating the wrinkles etched on his face, each line a story, a trial, a triumph. He sought no recognition, expected no thanks. For James, healing the world, even in its smallest fragments, was reason enough to rise each day. When he pulled up before the widow's house and carefully unloaded the planks, he knew that no matter how much the world changed, he would remain true to what he had always been, silent, steadfast, and ever diligent. The gravel road leading to James Callahan's home rattled beneath the old Chevy's wheels. Each small stone crunched like the forgotten rhythm of a song. The boards in the truck bed shifted, knocking softly against one another, merging with the engine's rasp. Midday sunlight pierced the cracked windshield, casting mottled patches of light across his face. Each wrinkle told the story of a lifetime. James drove with his customary slowness, not because age had weakened him, but because he had learned to cherish every moment, every breath, after years spent with death lurking at his heels. Suddenly, in the rearview mirror, red and blue lights danced. A patrol car slipped quietly behind him, like a familiar ghost from the past. James felt no panic. He neither cursed nor gripped the wheel tighter. His knotted hands, once steady on rifles under enemy fire, now rested gently on the worn wooden steering wheel. His gaze was calm, still as a windless lake. He eased the Chevy to the roadside. Dust rose in a cloud, and the patrol car's siren fell silent. Through the window, he saw the patrol car door swing open. A young officer, no more than 20-something, stepped out with a confident smile, as if the world lay in his grasp. Behind him, a slightly older colleague followed, his stride sharp, his eyes probing like a hunter on the scent. Their boots crunched on the gravel as they approached, and James felt that familiar tension he had faced countless times in his life. "Roll down your window, old-timer," the young officer said, his tone edged with mockery, as though teasing an old acquaintance. James did not reply. He only reached for the handle. The glass groaned and reluctantly obeyed, revealing his face to the sunlight. The officer leaned in, eyes flicking over the interior. No radio, no air conditioning, only the scent of motor oil and austere simplicity. He grinned, a sneer of derision. "No license plate, no registration. Does this heap even have insurance, sir?" His voice was as sharp as a blade. James remained unshaken. He quietly opened the glove compartment and withdrew a weathered envelope, its seal faded like a distant memory. Though his hands trembled slightly with age, they bore the certainty of one who had once disarmed bombs in the dark. The young officer took the envelope, peeled it open, and laughed as he skimmed its contents. "Historical registration? Expired 3 years ago." He exchanged a glance with his partner, as though discovering a new pastime. The other officer, standing by the truck bed, eyed the neatly stacked boards. "Building or demolishing, Grandpa?" he asked, his tone coldly sarcastic. James raised his head. His eyes were deep, as if piercing through the two men before him to a place they could never reach. "Just fixing Mrs. Wilson's porch," he replied, his voice low and measured, like a river flowing over ancient stones. In that moment, he did more than answer. He revealed why he woke each morning, to mend the world's broken pieces, even if only a small step at a time. The officers shot each other mocking looks. "How touching," the younger one said, his voice dripping with ridicule. "Got your ID?" James silently reached into his coat pocket and produced a worn leather wallet, the same one that had traveled with him across battlefields and through sleepless nights. He opened it to reveal an aged driver's license, a faded military ID, and a small photograph with dog-eared corners. The young officer picked up the photo, scanned it, and smirked. "What's this? A poker night?" he jeered, handing it to his partner as though it were a toy. James said nothing. He simply looked at them, his gaze not angry or defiant, but tinged with a profound sorrow, as if recalling faces that would never return. That photograph was no joke. It captured the final moment of a parachute unit, standing side by side before leaping into enemy territory. The smiles had faded with time, but in James's mind they remained vivid, as sharp as yesterday. He remembered every name, every story, every glance of those who never came home. Yet he spoke no words. He did not need to explain. For James, memory was to be kept, not flaunted. He sat there, in his battered car, under the officer's scrutinizing gaze, feeling that familiar loneliness, not because they failed to understand, but because he knew some truths only those who have walked the line between life and death could ever grasp. Sunlight glinted off James's coat shoulder, where the faded parachute division badge lay, a silent reminder of his past. He sought no respect, expected no apology. He only wished to continue his work, repairing Mrs. Wilson's steps and offering comfort to a neighbor. When the young officer handed back his documents, his tone softened slightly, as if he recognized something in James's eyes. But James paid him no mind. He tucked his wallet away, restarted the Chevy, and the engine's rasp rose again, like the heartbeat of one who refuses to give up. The gravel road stretched out before him, and James drove on, carrying memories, scars, and a heart that still beat for the small yet meaningful acts that defined his life. James Callahan stood before the battered Chevy. The midday sun glazed his weathered features, where each wrinkle mapped a life worn by wind and dust. The gravel road beneath his feet trembled softly, reminding him of the steps he once took on distant battlefields. When the young officer barked, "Step out of the car, hands where I can see them," his tone cold and laced with smug authority, James did not hesitate. He opened the door. His worn leather shoes hit the stones with a dry crackle as gentle as his own breath. He offered no resistance. He frowned not at all, but simply stood there, hands raised slowly. His gaze was tranquil, like a calm sea before the storm. Within him lay the patience of one who had faced trials far greater than flashing patrol lights. The young officer, a crooked smile on his lips, approached. His eyes probed for weakness. "Nothing sharp concealed on you, right?" he challenged, half teasing, half taunting. James met his gaze. Lips pressed together, he murmured, "Only my mind." Though spoken softly, those words carried a weight the officer failed to notice. They frisked him swiftly, suspicion never lacking. James felt the stranger's hand brush the old coat that had shielded him through blizzards and battlefield nights. Then they ordered him to sit on the roadside. His knees groaned as they met the earth, not from pain, but from memories of kneeling beside comrades beneath gunfire and smoke, where he once believed he would never rise again. The two officers set to searching the Chevy. They hauled out each tool, hammer, drill, hinges, the implements James used to mend the world, piece by piece. The clang of metal sounded stark, like the heartbeat of iron. One officer opened the glove compartment. He produced an old military notebook, its leather cover frayed, pages yellowed and lined with names. Some were starred, others crossed out in black ink. The young officer flipped through, smirking. "A kill list?" he joked, his laugh low as though uncovering a juicy secret. But James said nothing. He sat quietly, watching dust swirl on the breeze, as if peering into a distant place where those names were once faces, smiling brothers who never returned. Before the dust settled, a teenager on a bicycle appeared. He stopped a few feet away, raised his phone with a mischievous grin. "Got Grandpa busted!" he shouted, excitement in his voice, fingers flying across the screen. Within seconds, the video was online, captioned, "Old Man versus Police." His giggle cut through the silence like a knife. A curious crowd gathered. Some paused to watch, others strode by indifferent. A middle-aged man shook his head, whispering to his companion. A young woman snapped photos, her flash popping in the sun. Yet James remained still, a rock amid a rushing river, unmoved by stares or whispers. The young officer, now leaning against the patrol car, took a swig from a soda can. He looked as relaxed as if this were any other shift. His partner continued rummaging, upending the truck bed, but James did not watch them. He did not need to. He knew that vehicle as well as the palm of his hand, every bolt, every scratch. In his silence lay a strength invisible to the officers, the strength of one who had lain under enemy fire, trodden minefields, and pulled comrades from death's grip. For James, this moment, suspicion, ridicule, the crowd's prying eyes, was but a passing breeze. He had weathered far fiercer storms. He knew how to wait. Sunlight danced upon his coat shoulder, where the faded parachute division badge quietly told a story no one in the crowd noticed. He was no man easily cowed. In his heart lived memories of days when each second could be the last, when he and his brother stood on the razor's edge between life and death. He had learned that sometimes silence is the greatest power. Seated on the roadside under the crowd's scrutiny and the officer's mockery, James felt no shame, only a profound sadness, for the world had forgotten what he and men like him once sacrificed. Under the blazing midday sun, the gravel road at the edge of town seemed to fall silent. Only the wind whispered by, and the distant crunch of tires remained. James Callahan sat on the roadside, his sinewy hands resting lightly on his knees, his gaze fixed on the horizon, where dust swirled like old memories. The battered Chevy stood silent beside him, its bed piled high with lumber and tools, a reminder of the mission he had yet to complete, repairing Mrs. Wilson's porch step. The two young officers lingered nearby, their boredom evident, as if searching him was merely amusement on a long day. But in James's silence burned a strength they could not see, the slow ember of one who had crossed life's razor edge, where every second weighed as heavily as a lifetime. Across the street, by the faded sign of the old gas station, David Miller stood motionless. Squinting under his cap's brim, he wore a silver-gray shirt, his gaunt frame still bearing the hard lines of a veteran. When his eyes fell on James, seated like a criminal, his heart tightened. He said nothing, but his hand trembled as he pulled out his phone. Those rough fingers, once tightening safety harnesses in wartime, now dialed with purpose. "I need to report a grave mistake," he said, voice low yet steely. "They've made James Callahan sit on the roadside like a suspect. You must respond immediately." The call did not go to the local precinct, but to a private line where those who owed James their lives still remembered. Though David had left the service, his debt to James Callahan never faded. Years earlier, amid Iraq's smoke and fire, when David's Humvee erupted in flames, it was James, steadfast and unflinching, who dragged him from death's jaws. At every veterans gathering since, David would find James in the corner, quietly folding chairs after everyone left, as if he wished no one to notice him. But David noticed, and now, seeing his hero humiliated roadside, he felt a deep ache, not only for James, but for all they had sacrificed. Hundreds of miles away, at command headquarters, four-star General William Carter skimmed reports when his aide entered, offering a phone. "A civilian, reporting on Sergeant James Callahan." The name stiffened Carter. His eyes, accustomed to life-and-death decisions, went cold. "Where?" he asked, voice like stone. As the aide relayed the scene, Carter listened, each word etching itself into his mind. James Callahan was more than a name. He had led paratroopers through impossible missions, and Carter had seen him drag comrades from minefields under fire. "I'll be there in an hour," Carter said, rising as his chair creaked. A flame ignited within him, not anger but fierce determination to protect a forgotten hero. Back at the scene, the two officers had lost patience. They rifled through the Chevy, upending its bed, only to find wood, hammers, drills, the tools of a craftsman, not a criminal. The young officer, soda can now empty, shrugged. "Write him a citation," he said flatly. "Registration expired, unsafe vehicle, missing plates." His partner nodded, pulling out a clipboard and scrawling as though issuing a parking ticket. They approached James, thrusting the slip toward him with contempt. James did not reach for it, did not argue. He sat still, eyes as deep as if gazing beyond them, into a realm they could never touch. One officer muttered mockingly, "Think you're some war hero, do you?" But James did not move. He needed no proof. In his mind, the mud of Panama, Bosnia's biting cold, and the weight of fallen comrades rested like memories. Their jeers were meaningless noise. Within James's silence lay a profound sorrow. He bore no anger at their suspicion, no hurt at their disdain, only a quiet grief for a world that had forgotten his and his brethren's sacrifices. Every name in that old military notebook, every scar on his body, attested to battles fought not for glory, but for the men beside him. Seated by the roadside, under the scorching sun, James felt an invisible gulf between himself and the world. Yet he did not falter. He had learned to stand firm, even when the world turned its back. As the young officer turned away, the citation still in hand, James slowly lifted his head. His eyes drifted over the road, where dust still danced, where the battered Chevy waited. He thought of Mrs. Wilson, of the step that needed repair, of the small but meaningful acts he chose as his reason to live. He needed no one's understanding, no apology. To James, life was made of moments like this, when he faced injustice, faced oblivion, and still chose to rise and carry on. Somewhere David Miller had hung up. General Carter was on his way.
But James knew none of this. He only knew that, no matter how much the world changed, he would remain silent, steadfast, and unbowed.
The harsh midday sun beat down on the gravel road where James Callahan sat silently at the roadside. His sinewy hands rested on his knees, and his gaze pierced the swirling dust, reaching memories that no curious onlooker could imagine. The old Chevy stood beside him, its bed piled high with lumber, a symbol of the steadfast resolve he carried through life. The two young officers, now bored, leaned against the patrol car. The citation remained clipped to the clipboard, a hasty judgment rendered. Yet in James's heart, a slow-burning flame glowed, not anger, but the deep sorrow of one who sacrificed everything, only to be treated as a nobody. He spoke no word. He needed none. His silence weighed like a closed book, its pages filled with chapters written in blood and tears. At the 59th minute, when the stifling stillness felt eternal, thunderous tires shattered the calm. A black government-issued SUV roared up and screeched to a halt behind the patrol car, sending dust swirling like a declaration. The door swung open, and General William Carter emerged, his four-star insignia gleaming in the sun. Each stride he took carried the weight of authority and memory. His eyes, sharp as blades, did not sweep the crowd nor linger on the stunned officers. They locked onto James, the elderly man seated on the roadside. Yet in Carter's gaze, he was no mere old man. He was legend. Sergeant James Callahan. Carter's deep, steady voice rang out, sounding like a summons from the past. James lifted his chin slightly, meeting the general's eyes, and for a moment, time stood still. The murmuring crowd fell silent. Phones raised to record slowly lowered, as if they realized they were witnessing something far greater than a mundane roadside scene. The young officer, clutching the last vestiges of his confidence, stepped forward hesitantly. "Is there a problem, sir?" But Carter did not reply at once. He turned, steel cold in his gaze, and asked, each word a hammer blow, "Who detained this man?" No one answered. The two officers exchanged glances. Their earlier smugness evaporated, replaced by palpable unease. Carter moved closer, his stature immense, yet it was not his height that stilled the crowd, but the power in his words. "Do you know who he is?" he asked, his tone even yet razor-sharp, cutting through the heat. The officers shrugged, avoiding his gaze. He did not wait for their response. "This man saved my life in 1984, he said, each syllable a bullet echoing along the road. He led the rescue team up the mountain when the world thought we were dead. He trained every reconnaissance commander for 3 decades, those same leaders now defending this nation." He gestured toward the battered Chevy, his voice lowering even as it brimmed with unhidden pride. This vehicle carried medical supplies through the floods of Hurricane Andrew, reaching people no one else could. Carter's words washed over the crowd like a tidal wave. An elderly woman, hidden among the onlookers, spoke up, voice trembling. "He built a walkway for my mother after her stroke." A grease-stained mechanic stepped forward, eyes bright. "He taught my son how to survive, to face hardship." Voices rose, sharing fragments of James's deeds, small flames illuminating the darkness. Each story testified to a life not lived by an ordinary old man, but by one who quietly changed countless lives. The two officers turned pale, their citation suddenly meaningless. They stood diminished before the weight of truths they had not expected. Carter faced James, his expression softened, respect deep and clear. "Allow me to help you to your feet, Sergeant?" he asked, voice gentle yet earnest. But James needed no assistance. He rose slowly, knees creaking, yet his back remained straight, like an ancient oak before the storm. He returned the general's salute, silent, yet carrying all the pride of a soldier. The crowd held its breath, feeling the power of that moment, not in ranks or medals, but in the heart of one who had never yielded. Within James stirred a surge of emotion. He sought no acclaim, expected no spotlight, yet standing there beneath the crowd's gaze and the general's honor, he felt a bittersweet ache. The years of battle, the sleepless nights, the faces of fallen comrades, all played vividly, like an unending film. He was not sad for being misunderstood, nor angry at suspicion. He felt pain for a world that sometimes forgot those who gave everything to keep it turning. And now, as stories of his valor echoed and the general stood before him like a brother in arms, James sensed a faint light, his heart's scars at last acknowledged. The gravel road remained unchanged, dust still swirled, but the air had shifted. James stood tall, his gaze sweeping the crowd, without arrogance, without challenge, but with profound serenity. He spoke no words, yet in his heart rang a silent vow. He would continue, as he always had, to mend the world piece by piece, seen or unseen. The old Chevy, the lumber, and his mission awaited. And James Callahan, soldier, craftsman, hero, stepped forward, carrying past and future upon his unbroken shoulders. James Callahan stood in the middle of the gravel road, his figure small yet unwavering, like a mountain unshaken by the wind. The crowd still gathered around him. Their eyes were no longer curious or indifferent, but filled with respect. General William Carter stood at his side, his uniform gleaming, yet it was James's silence that commanded attention, a strength that needed no boast. He met the gazes of the two young officers. His eyes were not angry, but profound, as if seeing through them to a truth they had never touched. When he spoke, his voice was low and deliberate. Each word seemed carved into the air. "Do not apologize to me," he said, his gaze resting on the younger officer, Michael Evans. "Apologize to the next old man you stop, before you assume he is nothing." His words carried no accusation, but the distilled lesson of years of pain. They came from the heart of a man who had witnessed too much forgetting. Michael, the young officer, dropped his head. His face blushed with shame. A clumsy apology stumbled from his lips. "I didn't know, sir," but it fell flat, like a breeze passing through. James nodded gently, not in acceptance, but as a sign that he understood their naivete. "The problem," he said, his voice softer now, yet still weighted by a life lived on the knife's edge, "is that you never know who stands before you." He paused. "Respect must come first." His words were addressed not only to the two officers, but served as a reminder to the entire town. Every person carries a story, and negligence can wound hearts that have sacrificed in silence. General Carter, standing silently beside him, produced a thin leather-bound folder. He opened it, his voice clear though not loud, so that all could hear. The pages detailed James's record: 3 silver stars, 2 purple hearts, covert missions spanning 3 continents, where he faced death to bring comrades home. Carter pointed to the old Chevy that the officers had once mocked. "This vehicle," he said, "is exempt from registration because of its military heritage, because of what it and its driver have done for this country." A hush swept through the crowd. Whispers spread like ripples, as though they had uncovered a hidden treasure. The next day, the news spread like wildfire. Under the weight of truth, the local police department publicly admitted its error. The town, once small and quiet, became animated by an unprecedented decree. They declared James Callahan Day, a day to honor not only him, but all unsung soldiers. From that moment on, an initiative called Callahan was launched, aimed at building 340 walkways for disabled veterans, each path a tribute to silent sacrifices. Michael Evans, the young officer who had mocked James, now served as a volunteer at the Veterans Association. He quietly learned from James how he wielded a hammer and how he listened to stories no one else would tell. The police department, recognizing the valuable lesson, introduced a new training course titled Recognition and Respect. James, though not one to seek the spotlight, was invited to be the inaugural speaker. In his address, he did not recount medals or exploits. He spoke only of the value of respect, of how every person carries a story we can never fully know. A small card inscribed with the words, "You never know who stands before you," was handed to every recruit, a reminder that hasty judgment can blind us to greater truths. James, as he always did, continued to drive his old Chevy down country roads. He carried lumber to repair homes, groceries to the needy, and sometimes even coffins for nameless veterans who had no one to bid them farewell. Now, patrol cars no longer stopped him. Instead, they saluted, a silent greeting full of meaning. One morning, as he drove through the town square, a golden-haired child waved. Her innocent smile was like sunshine. Her father, a step behind, quickly returned the salute, his eyes shy yet sincere. James nodded in return. He spoke no word, but felt a warmth kindle in his heart, as though old scars were finally soothed. He sought no fame, no praise. To James, respect was not in speeches or engraved plaques. It was in action. In every bolt he tightened, every pathway he built, every silent legacy he left behind. Each day he rose, donned his old coat, and drove his Chevy along familiar roads, carrying a mission that never changed, to mend the world's broken pieces, no matter how small, a porch step, a smile, or a moment of being truly seen. As he passed through the square, the entire town rose, not because he demanded it, but because he had taught them to see the invisible, the worth of a heart that never stops beating for others. Within James surged an emotion not of pride, but of bittersweet sorrow. He thought of the comrades who had fallen, of the long nights he thought he would not survive. Yet he had survived, and now each greeting, each grateful glance served as a reminder that his sacrifices were not in vain. He spoke no word. He simply drove on, his eyes fixed ahead, where the gravel road stretched on, carrying untold stories and a heart that still burned, undiminished by the cold winds of time. James Callahan drove his old Chevy along the gravel roads, carrying with him the lives he had mended with tireless hands and an unyielding heart. Each step he repaired, each path he built, stood as testament to a silent legacy, a lesson in respect and compassion. The town now looked upon him with gratitude, yet James simply smiled, quietly continuing his mission. Share this story with your friends and family in the United States to spread the lesson of every person's worth. Like the video, leave a comment, and join us in honoring the unsung heroes. Our channel needs your support to tell more meaningful stories. Thank you for being with us.